of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Here is the feast, dear brothers and sisters, when we celebrate the two apostles, Peter and Paul, two figures and personalities that the Church has celebrated with great respect since the earliest times. Two personalities who shaped and directed the Church, and at the same time, two completely different personalities. On the one hand, Peter, who constantly promised fidelity to Christ, but who renounced him the night Christ was captured. And on the other hand, Paul, who never personally met or saw Christ, but was one of the fiercest persecutors of Christians and one of the worst enemies of the Church of Christ. And that is the paradox of Orthodox Christianity. The Lord calls the faith of the one who renounced it 3 times the rock on which he will build his church, and even the gates of hell will not be able to overcome it. That is Peter's confession, which then became the faith of the apostles. Then the one who persecuted the church of Christ, who was his fiercest opponent, the Lord makes him the greatest missionary, the greatest among the apostles, together with Peter, James, and John, therefore making him one of the pillars of his church. And if we add to that the fact that the first witness of the resurrection was the woman from whom Christ cast out 7 demons, Mary Magdalene, and the first man to whom the Lord Christ tells to enter paradise was a robber sentenced to death, then we really have nothing else but to cry out, "Glory to you for your mercy, O Lord." Therefore we celebrate 2 apostles, 2 exceptional and unrepeatable personalities in the history of mankind, 2 completely different and incredibly charismatic personalities. However, the Church deliberately did not give preference to any of the apostles. Orthodoxy is the faith of the Apostle Peter and the 12. Orthodoxy is equally the faith of James and Jude and Barnabas. Orthodoxy is certainly the faith of the converted Saul, who was named Paul after his conversion. Orthodoxy is the faith of all the apostles together. And this is probably the reason why, out of the 27 books of the New Testament, we not only have 4 Gospels by different authors, but majority of the epistles are written by Paul. Only a few are written by other apostles, including Peter himself. But that is orthodoxy. And most of these people in the ancient church were Jews. Of course, there were those from pagan nations among them, but most of them were Jews. And they had to find a way to believe, how to define, how to preach the gospel of the Lord Christ, how to do what they are called to do by God. And that is what unites them by the end of the 1st century, by about the year 85 of the 1st century. And they were all already united. And from that time it became clear what orthodoxy is. That is the true faith, the faith of the holy apostles as instructed by the Lord himself. Then later the New Testament was defined and accepted, and that faith was defended through the centuries from many heresies and false teachings. And that narrow path of the gospel was found in the community of all the apostles and the community of the 2 supreme apostles, Peter and Paul. They are pillars. They are leaders. Peter the apostle to the circumcised Jews, and Paul the apostle to the Gentiles. There were disagreements and disputes between them, but that also is orthodoxy. There was also sharp criticism. Paul, who insists on his apostolic status, criticizes the Apostle Peter, who will not sit with those who are uncircumcised. And it is historically impossible to define and explain everything. But what is certain, and what the Church testifies from the earliest times, is that these two pillars of the Church have reached the unity of thought and unity in love. And despite sharp disagreements, they always remained one in the service of Christ, as one body of Christ. That is orthodoxy, dear brothers and sisters. That is why the Church has been celebrating these two apostles from the earliest times on the same day. Hence, these two apostles present themselves on the icons not only together, but also embracing, exchanging the kiss of peace, which is nothing less, and certainly nothing more, which is a liturgical act. Not just because they both martyred in Rome, but because they were so different. Because God worked through both of them. God chose both as his instruments. God worked through both, through each in his own way, along with the others. And so, until the end of the world and the time, the leading figures of early Christianity, ancient Christianity, will be the apostles Peter and Paul. And they will always be displayed together on the icons. This is what our Holy Church testifies to us. It is sealed in the books of the New Testament. On the one hand, historically the Church never believed and still does not believe that the Apostle Paul was an extremely charismatic person who rejected any kind of church institution. In fact, on the contrary. And on the other hand, historically, the Church never accepted that Peter has a special role in the church institution with authorities assigned only to one bishop, or rather one person, which eventually could lead to the dogmas of a universal jurisdiction by only one person. The Church has always been conciliar in its being. One cannot speak of the Church without its ancient apostolic roots and the way the Church saw itself in the first 1,000 years. One cannot speak of the Church without the full awareness and understanding of the ecumenical councils. It is through the conciliarity, or Catholicity, or unity rather, that the Church is best to be understood. Ancient Christianity rejects both of these interpretations, sometimes attributed to Apostles Peter and Paul respectively, and we celebrate these two apostles together, and they forever remain the foundations, pillars, and coryphei of one holy, conciliar, Catholiki, and Apostolic Church of Christ. And it is very interesting that on the icons, the Apostle Paul is always represented with the other apostles, even if historically he was not with them at that moment. For example, at the moment of Ascension and Pentecost. The Apostle Paul did not witness the Ascension and Pentecost with other apostles, but the Church tradition presents him together with other apostles. It is the testimony of the Church, a testimony of that ancient Christian Church, which says that orthodoxy is in unity. It is the testimony of the Church that the apostles were all together and that together they form one holy, conciliar, Catholiki, and Apostolic Church, which is Christ's, and whose foundations and pillars will always be the faith and preaching of the apostles Peter and Paul, together with all other apostles, through whose prayers may the Lord recognize us as his own, and may we be counted at least as witnesses of the faith entrusted to us, just as they were the apostles of Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.